All right, hello everybody. This is Carl with Tabletop Tango with my partner Eric. Hello,
Greetings, salutations.
Hey, so I did a little while ago. I did a couple of videos on a new campaign I was doing where I talked about how I came up with the concept, how I worked with the players to figure out what we're going to do, and then what was going to be kind of the adventure. But what I didn't talk about, which was pretty important, was how do you put all the mechanics together to make that work, to give that feel that you're looking for. Now, just a reminder, this was cyberpunk future, but with people who have just become gods. So this is a kind of a unique play on it. You know, it's not medieval fantasy with gods. It's not pure cyberpunk. And so just the basic rules just wouldn't do the trick. And so I've got my mechanics guy, because Eric I think you did most of the work on it, to be quite honest. You wrote it up, You took it, you ran with it, you figured it all out, and I just kind of wrote on your coattails.
Threw some things
there.
by you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this episode is going to be generally about kind of our kind of methods and kind of the way to look at it. Obviously, this is Savage Worlds. Now, Savage Worlds is probably like one of the easiest, versus like a narrative game or something. But Savage Worlds is probably kind of one of the easiest, more mechanical games that you can kind of apply any setting and you can kind of mess with the rules. They give you the tools right there to make everything really easy for GMs to kind of mess with the rules, and that's what all the setting rules that we've talked about before are there to do too. So that's one of the biggest strengths, right, of Savage Worlds. So this is obviously about Savage Worlds, which makes it easy, but you could definitely apply a lot of these same things to other systems.
Absolutely. I think so. Where did we start? I think the first thing we had talked about was the feel, right? This is future, high tech, high power, and then that has to link with the fact that these gods who are just finding themselves are high power. So obviously the basic rules of Savage Worlds, as we went through many videos talking about, it just doesn't cover it. It's missing something. So what was the first thoughts that went through your mind? Was it, hey, this has to be completely homebrew? Was it, hey, I feel like there's a couple of settings I can mash together? Where was your head at when you first when I first came up with this concept and brought it to you?
Yeah, well, a lot of it was player input, right? That we were both like, oh, crap, what are we going to do with this?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, you always start with, I would think, like, and this doesn't always have to be like some crazy thing, but you always have that elevator pitch, right?
Yep.
So what's the elevator pitch for your setting? And then, what system are you using? Those are the first kind of two things. And the first thing you think about is like, well, does the base system cover it? In our case, it was a hard no.
Yeah, not even close.
This is close. Yeah, like you said, it's a cyberpunk, but with a hidden magic. So that was already kind of like a funny thing. That's kind of like basically like future Harry Potter, I guess, was kind of like what people were thinking. future so it's like future dystopian Harry Potter. Oh, but then also gods become a thing, like your players become gods. So that's just like a whole bunch of stuff, right?
That was a lot to unpack.
Yeah, when we were all starting to talk about it, and I'm just thinking about, so the first thing to do is just kind of think, okay, the base setting doesn't cover it, right? Are there any other settings that I can easily manipulate that would do this? That's kind of the first thing to do, because I think generally, you want to kind of do, as a GM, you want to do the least amount of work on the mechanics as possible, because you want to spend the most time on, your story and on the players, right? So it's always like, what can I do? What's the biggest shortcut I can do that accomplishes my goal of this setting?
Right. So we had a feeling that we're going after, and
we had a feeling, and then I was throwing
use what is there, because I am not smart enough to be designing game
and it's
components.
A big project, right?
Yeah.
And then I think, so one of the first things to look at is also like, well, what is my time frame? Because maybe, if you're really into this, you'd want to create your whole like original setting, right, with all these interesting mechanics. I did that. I made a Fallout for Savage Worlds, and I just did the whole thing pretty much from scratch. But that was a huge project. In our case, right, Carl, like we ended one game. we wanted to start a new game, and we had about like 3 weeks. We pretty much said, right?
Yep.
So for our case, it wasn't like let's do a whole thing from scratch. It was like we have about 3 weeks. So yeah. So in our case, it was like what can we do that's kind of the biggest shortcut? And when I was throwing to you, it was like, well, gods. I immediately thought of like the superpower compendium. Which is kind of the best way to emulate like god powers, because right,
but that was the first thing, right? We were talking about high powered gods, and the first thing that came to mind was, well, what's something similar to that feel, right? So, high powered, can just use powers at will. It's not power points, spending them on spells, things like that. And so there was something existing, the Superpowers Companion, that provided some framework to start with.
For at least how the powers were constructed.
Yeah, there was something there to say, here's some base. Though, of course, the Superpowers Companion, and I think you might talk a little bit about that, was the old edition, and we're doing everything in Suede.
Yeah.
So it was a great start.
That was a separate thing. Yeah,
that was a separate thing. We'll cover that.
We'll touch back on that, but yeah, I mean, that's just the easiest thing to think of, because, right, superheroes are gods. That's what they came from, right? Like mythology, Greek mythology, all that stuff. It's just...
Right.
You can't, that's our mythology, right? Modern mythology. So we had that. But then what really is throwing us through the loop, like if it was just a game about gods, that might be easier. But for us, it was like, well, we need a cyberpunk hidden magic. So what I immediately thought of is Rifts. Rifts is all about, Rifts is like everything, but it's a high-powered setting that has both, high technology, it has cyberpunk, dystopian elements. It also has powerful magic. Right. And that's something that me and Carl, we kind of discussed a little bit, and I brought to you, was like, well, just for, for the players to have kind of opponents or threats that are powerful enough, right? Rifts has that. Rifts has powerful technological things that, go against dragons, right? Dragon could be like a god. They also have powerful magic that uses the Savage Worlds like magic system, but kind of ups it in a lot of ways with mega power modifiers. So it kind of had that part of it. And then it was just about like, okay, we have Rifts, we have the superpowers. Now let's just like, how do we jam them together? So,
but I think you made a really good point. I just want to reiterate was, so no matter what the setting, no matter what the concept, and if the concept is the characters are gods, there has to be something that they work against that has to be somewhat of a threat. So either it's in superpower games, it's another super against them, but in this case, the normies. This is a future, and part of the reason this whole thing takes place in the cyberpunk future world was it's not a cakewalk anymore for gods, because the world has progressed on, and so being able to handle that, which is where you came and said, where do I get that in Savage Worlds, sort of this, up the power level, and that's obviously Rifts. Rifts comes to mind right away when we start talking about that. Now, I'm sure there's other settings that do that, but Rifts is sort of top of the mind when you start talking about that.
It fit our needs enough that, like I said, we had 3 weeks, and to what you said before, and I said this to you, and then I was like, we'll just kind of try to wing it. You had like somebody else that kind of done. There's a couple of other people have done Suede as superpower compendium conversions, but I kind of looked at them and didn't really fit, and I didn't really like parts of it. So I also knew, and then it really became apparent. It was like, I need to go through the whole book and rewrite a bunch of stuff. So again, that was So like we said, Savage Worlds has all these different settings, so we were able to pull from it. This is going to be a lot harder if you were like, oh, I want to play 5e and I want to do a cyberpunk thing. That's a way bigger ask, because it's just not set up for that. So I think part of it is like you'd have to look at another system probably.
Right, and that's always a possibility, right? If there's a system that matches it, maybe you should be playing that system. If you're looking for gothic horror, everybody dies, you probably should be playing Call of Cthulhu and not trying to shoehorn it into D&D, right? So that...
Yes, exactly.
Know the
limitations of the system.
We had already chosen that Savage Worlds would be the base. So now it's, again, and Savage Worlds is a great base for that, because it has that flexibility that...
It's made for that, right?
Yeah,
it's made for
definition.
That. That's what it's... That's why you, like, all your games are different settings, different genres, right? Because that's what you like. It's mixing it up. So... Yeah, so for us, it was like, okay, we knew what we had to do. You were handling the story. I was handling the mechanics pretty much. I would like, we would have a couple meetings and stuff, mini meetings, to go over stuff. But yeah, so what else? So now, okay, I have these two things. Now it was more like, okay, what can we get rid of? What can we use? Right, Rifts has these things called like frameworks, which are like almost like classes, and those we just went away with completely. We don't need these. These are
because they did not
too
match
much
the feel. Yeah, it was just
they don't match the feel. But we knew we needed like cyberpunk, and to me they have something called Mars in there, which is these kind of like, along with these pretty much super powerful beings, there's these Mars characters which are less powerful but more like experience. Like think of them as like the Hawkeyes to the Thors, right?
right.
So I was like, okay, this is perfect. We can kind of use this. Now I definitely toned it down a little bit. They were still a little bit too more powerful for the base characters. So we were like, we have to eliminate all the magic Mars from this. We have to eliminate some of the like, we don't want somebody in robot armor. It just didn't make sense.
Yeah. So let me interject there real quick. So
yeah, go ahead.
No, just kind of walk through that thought process, though. So you were going through that, and what made you say, "Oh, this doesn't feel right. It feels overpowered." How did you define that, and what kind of went through your mind when you started saying, "Well, I need to peel this away and peel that away"? I think that's important for people to, because if it was me, I probably would have said, "Okay, yeah, Mars seems okay. This seems, I don't like the robot armor thing, so I'll throw that out." But I'm not making an analysis. I'm not really thinking it through. And you did a lot of thought process around balancing and what's the right power level and how we're going to trade things. So what went through your mind, or how did you go through that process?
Well, I mean, I've played Rifts, I've played superhero games, so I've played a lot of them, so I kind of knew generally what the power level was. Now, given more time, I probably would have hacked it even more. Like, I wasn't totally like at the end. I think we did pretty good, but like I wasn't totally happy with some of the balancing. But we just didn't have the time, right, to like completely go in. I think if I was to do it again, I just would have. If I had another pass at it, I would just do like a generic thing. But yeah, I mean, first of all, I knew I can get rid of all the magic items because it's hidden Harry Potter, right? So just get rid of all the magic options. Robot armor had to go. At first, we were like, power armor's fine, but then I was like, this is just too much, and it's relying too much on equipment. I mean, one of the things that was like, I think a struggling point for us, definitely for me, that I was bringing to you a lot is, well, we want cybernetics to be a thing, but cybernetics are very powerful. So we left the cybernetics in, but then I had to think of ways to kind of penalize them later on, just because they were so powerful, and because most of the time they're so we did things like I took away power points based on the strain.
But that was a key thought process, right? We didn't want, so the conceit is that these folks are becoming gods from being
that
normal.
Was the end point,
right?
Yeah.
And if you had too much powerful technology, it'd be like that's what they'd be using. Forget their god powers,
exactly,
because I've got stuff that's more. And so you had to come up with sort of a way of balancing, taking away, giving. To make that work, and that's part of what I thought was really nice.
We definitely limited the rarity of things, and we limited the rarity like they have a rarity system. We limited the rarity of the ones that get like a nice item. Like some of them will just be like you get a piece of armor or get a weapon, and we're like, okay, you can still do that, but it's limited to like rarity 2 or -2. Right. And then the other ones that didn't get it, we're like, you're just limited to 0, which is even like less rare. Just because we thought, that those are, you don't want to have everything so powerful from the beginning. Exactly. And even though the way we did it, I knew that you were doing it this way, where we would have a couple of sessions of us as normies. But then, like in the back of my mind, I knew that it was like a couple sessions as being normies and then we're becoming gods. So, it was it wasn't like we had to feel like and have all this progression from the beginning. It was like we're doing one part of the character creation, and then the other part is just a little bit spaced out. But right. They were so linked, right, that I really had to think about what's the immediate effects of getting like cybernetics and guns and armor and stuff. So cutting out all the stuff that was like power armor would just be too reliant on the armor part. They wouldn't get enough stuff to kind of like, well, at one point, like you'd be happy to like, okay, well, I don't need my power armor because I'm a god. I have god powers.
Right.
But if so much of the stuff they got is in their power armor, then it just wouldn't feel right later on. So that was why we were like, okay, let's get rid of power armor. So it's definitely kind of thinking through that whole kind of story arc, or just kind of like, well, what the end goal here is the god powers.
Right.
And this is more the cyberpunk, all that stuff. Like, yeah, they're getting, and we did start out kind of powerful. I mean, we started out with 2 advances. We definitely got a lot of extra stuff, but that also was kind of the intention, right? Like we were normies, but we were novices. We were experienced, and we were like, and I think this is to the setting, right? We were experienced, but we were also kind of unique in a little bit. Like we weren't too powerful, but we were also kind of like a little bit better than other people of our experience level, and then maybe that's part of the reason we got chosen as gods. There was something unique about us from the get-go, but it wasn't like we were so powerful. So that definitely was a little bit of a delicate balance to like, let's leave in some stuff, let's take away stuff. So now, and just always think about your end goal. Yeah, I think that's...
So now, if I would have started with, because that, when in a concept video, I kind of talked a little bit about this, but the group said, oh, wouldn't it be great if we were, wouldn't it be great if we were the, normal people, runners, and suddenly we became gods, and boy, it would have been easier for you if we just said, well, we're going to start off with gods. You're gods, you've been, this thing has happened, and then we're going to, sort of build backstory around, this is what happened, you can talk about it, yeah, you might have been a runner in the past, and here's some things, and maybe you got some equipment because of that, but how much easier would that have made life to be
honest? Oh, like 100% easier. Yeah, like so much easier, because it was a very interesting challenge, because it was like, it wasn't so far apart, where it was really just like, okay, here's your initial one, then we had to play in that space for a long time, and that had to feel like fun and interesting, and then gods came later. And it wasn't like you said, like just from the immediacy. It was like, we have 3 sessions, just enough to get the feel that we're normies, and then do the god thing, because that's what we wanted to get to.
Right.
So it was a very interesting challenge. It was a lot of fun as the player. I'm a player in this, so it was a lot of fun as a player to have that enough of that journey, but still get the god stuff, soon enough where it was fun to start playing in that space. But yeah, way easier, because in that case, then we would not have gotten a lot of more of that stuff. I would not have let cybernetics would not have been a thing. I mean, I had to be like, I had 2 stages, and maybe we can release this document. We can put it as a PDF or something. It's pretty rough, but if people are curious, they can look at it.
That's it's your baby, so your call.
Yeah,
we can definitely put this up on the site and on my website.
It's cool, the open license with riffs and the other stuff that I took from. But I'm totally open to that. But having it where I have the initial character creation, and then I have, now you're ascended, what happens? And then I had to have multiple things of not just
all linked together. That's the biggest problem.
Yeah,
right?
It linked together. I had, if you're ascended, if you had cybernetics, this is what happens with this. And then we also had magic, so I had to have a separate. Very quickly, we had a concept of themes and domains were kind of like the main trappings, and then we had to think about, well, a god of magic. That has to be its own domain, and it's going to almost have to be different, because magic is a thing in the game, and it uses the Suede magic system and Rift's mega powers. So then I had to create another thing for that. So it was like definitely much harder to have those. This is this, and then this is this, and then the second part, if you had taken these things, and this is different for you. So
and I think
that makes sense.
And the flavor, a lot of the document that we put together kind of, how would I say this, kind of requires that flavor, right? So when you talked about major and minor domains, that was something we came up with to say, well, here's, again, the feel of the game. Gods, we got a god of war who's also the god of X, and we've got a god of this, and that's classic human history. So building that in would have been easier if you just say, hey, it's superpower companion and do this, but we wanted the flavor.
Do whatever you want.
Yeah, wanted that flavor, and then that's where you had to lead yourself to say, okay, now I've got the trappings I have to deal with. I've got we know in the superpowers companion, for those who don't know, there in some of the different levels, there's a limit to how many power points you can spend on a particular power. Well, you said, well, okay, that seems to lane pretty well with the domain. So a major domain, you can go, I think, was up to 15. Was that it?
15.
And then for a minor domain, it's only 10, or was it 5?
8.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that had to play into it. So again, the feel of the game and the thought process that these aren't just supers, these are gods, and gods have a thing about them. How does that thing roll back into the rules, the homebrew piece of it that we're trying to put together?
Yeah.
Very cool. So you've got now, so again, we got the document. So you've lined the magic in with the megas. That was a little easier to do. We lined in supers. You had to go through the process of translating the old superpowers companion into Suede.
Yeah, and that was a whole separate thing. It was transferring it to enough where I felt like, okay, these powers make sense now. But there was also some little tweaks that I thought that kind of fit the setting a little bit more. Also, something that some of the problems, like we were talking about, like some of the limits not being really limited. So like requires activation. Okay, we came up with like little unique concepts for that to make it feel like valid. Now, an interesting thing that you brought up to me was, initially you were like, this was something that you brought to me completely. This was like story based, that you wanted a divine form.
Yes.
And then at first you were kind of thinking, what your original thoughts on that was what? It was like they wanted divine form, and it was
the
kind
point
of always
was
going to be that way, right?
What humans saw you as was just your veil, your mortal veil, but what your true form was something different. And then if you used your powers, you would reveal your true form.
But that's what we came up with later. But originally, do you remember what your thought was at first?
Now I'm trying to do it. We went through a lot of iterations, I guess.
There was a lot of iterations. That's what I'm trying to
you got to ferret out. I guess I don't remember exactly. So
I remember just being kind of like, you brought that concept to me about the divine form, and at first we were like, well, let's make sure we dedicate some of that, like people can use some PowerPoints from the superhero book to make that. Because one of the concerns with the superhero book is like glass cannons, basically. Or like, the theme of like being a god of weather, not being able just to kind of be tougher. So another ways that we came up with that was, we just gave some of these gods some stuff. So this is not even superhero stuff. One of the ideas that we eventually got to kind of collaborating was, okay, now they get a step up to their vigor, and they get their full vigor plus 2 to toughness.
Right, not
which
halved.
is just kind of like, we were like, all gods have to be just a little bit tougher. Like, if they're the god of nerds, I guess, whatever, and they're just like, and they're super weak, it just doesn't feel right. So they're still going to be weaker than the, Minotaur beast god that we have, the weather might god. But they're still a little tougher, right? So that was kind of an original thing that we came up with, was that full vigor plus 2.
Well,
being a little bit tougher. Give them some regeneration.
Right.
Everybody gets just some regeneration.
So I think going back again, circling back to the feel of the game, right? And that's what we talked about. Gods, like you said, gods are tough to begin with. I mean, they're gods, right? So they're not wimps. So how do we represent that by not making people have to spend points, so to speak? To do that. And so there was some interesting little ideas like the vigor to drive toughness so I think again you go back, just to reiterate, you go back and you understand what you feel you're trying to get across, and then you start tweaking those rules to get that feeling, and you have to iterate, because I think we iterated like 4 or 5 times on that, we should give them PowerPoints. There's a concept of, we'll give them PowerPoints that they have to spend on certain things. And then it's like, well, no, we won't do that. We'll just give them the thing. and supposed to make them spend points on it, and so a lot of iteration to get that. But I think we come, to the final stage where it has the feeling that gods are badass, to the point where I was looking at the characters that people were putting together and go, man, these guys are really badass as far as gods go.
And that's one thing that I wanted to bring up too, is like almost more a final thought or whatever, is that I was kind of like, okay, we're getting, I had to look at how many PowerPoints do I think kind of fits. And it was like, we kind of did a rising star rules, which in the superhero book is the superhero book has different like levels, like kind of, 4 colors, like Avengers, or and then you have higher ones that would be more powerful superheroes. And there's a rising star rule, which is kind of like you start weaker and then you can get power points as you get to different ranks.
Right.
We thought that made the most sense. We want to have that progression. But it was still like they need to start powerful enough to feel like gods. And eventually we kind of settled on, eventually we're going to end up cosmic. And I think this is the point I'm trying to make, is that, I was saying to you, and usually this is going to be one person, but you have to think of, okay, well, can I still present the players with challenges that fit this? Because I was really like to you, we're going to be strong, like cosmic level, like we're going to end up cosmic level. Is that cool? Do you have ideas besides other gods? Like, can you have things? And you were like, yes, I can do this. So I was like, okay, great.
And I certainly hope that that's still true.
Yeah, I think it will be, because it is Savage Worlds, right? So once you kind of looking at that balance is just really thinking about, do I have the tools? Do I think I can present that challenge to the players still? And that kind of, some of the things we trimmed back, some of the stuff we let. And I guess another point I want to make that you were just talking about is, if you have something in a game, and this is just how I feel about game design, and people can totally disagree with me, is that you should never penalize players for doing a certain thing. You should never make them pay. Like, it should always be incentivize, I think, is the better way to go around it. And if you really need something for the players, for the characters to feel like, just give it to them. Don't, like you said, like we just gave them that vigor plus. We also, instead of them having to spend an edge on getting power points, we came around to, we're just going to, every time you go up a rank, you get 10 power points. Because you are gods, you are becoming more powerful. It's not a question of that. So you're just going to allow them to get them more powerful. It's not, there's no tax here. And that fit the setting. And so it was just like, the players get the full vigor. It wasn't like you said. So, cause that's what fit the setting. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so what other items did you think to cover? What other thoughts did you have?
I don't know. I mean, did you have any more questions as far as my process or
your thought process? Dig into your brain.
Well, because you were like so hyper focused on the story and getting that together, and it was also learning a new game, a new virtual tabletop.
Oh my god, yeah.
To add on top of this, you were like, let's do Foundry. I
wasn't do Foundry. Somebody said, you've got to do Foundry. It's so good.
No. I said Foundry was really cool. I'm not sure about Savage Worlds yet. And then you said, I bought it. I said, okay, I'll get you the license for Savage Worlds, which is $10.
It was like overnight. It was this one day, I was like, okay, fine, I'll just buy it. It's $50. Why not? We'll try it out.
I still really like Foundry, but I would say, this is a quick aside, we're getting a little off topic. It's not quite there yet for Savage Worlds, right? It's still not in the complete stage. The sheet is a little bit lackluster, but Foundry is extremely robust. It's definitely, I think, the best one, especially in the future.
And if you're interested in running Savage Worlds on Foundry, I actually did a video on some of the pieces that I found, little components, modules that made my life a little easier, and a couple scripts I wrote myself because it didn't do what I wanted it to do. So, plus I like writing scripts.
But tangent aside, is there anything else?
But I think but your point is, we bit off a lot. And so without your help kind of driving the, and I know you're passionate about these things, so driving that mechanics piece of it, there's no way in 3 weeks I would have figured out how to homebrew a rule set to go along with the feeling while trying to put together a story. I probably would have just, half-assed something and said, yeah, Supers is close enough and let's call it good. And, and it just wouldn't have that same feel, because that thought process, again, to say, here's the setting, here's the pieces that make sense, would have got lost because I just wouldn't have had the brain power to, go and think about like major and minor domains. It's obvious, it makes sense, but to do the mechanics around it would have taken more time than I think I had the mental capacity to do in the 3 weeks to get it done. So if
I would not have been able
give
to
yourself
do
plenty of time. That's the rule.
I would not have been able to do the story and the virtual tabletop and do the mechanics either. Like I could not have done your part while doing mine either. Like that just wouldn't be possible. So like vice versa, yeah.
So
one thing I wanted to point out, it wasn't even just the feeling. It's also like because I've played them, I knew of some pitfalls, and I really could see like if when we could have just done like okay, we'll just like play it by ear, blah blah blah. But as you saw when we were doing character creation, there is these like pitfalls that we really could have gotten stuck in, and it would have, it's kind of like I feel like you're an engineer, you do engineering. I mean, I've studied movie stuff in college, and pre-production is so important for everything, right? Like planning ahead saves you time when you're doing the thing, so much so you're so much more efficient, right? When you do plan ahead and you kind of think of those things beforehand and you invest in that.
If you don't plan, you plan to fail. That's how that.
I mean, like I've done dog training, right? If you spend the time training a dog as a puppy, then your next 12 years with the dog is just amazing versus like not. So that was part of it too. For me, it was like I saw potential pitfalls, and that's why to you I was like, we can't just use this without spending some time on it. It's just not. I just knew that we'd have a lot of issues if we did it that way. So yeah,
which I did. I had not played Rifts. I had not done any mega. I'll call it mega power type things before. I mean, I've played in a super powers or a supers game, but it wasn't like cosmic super. You really had to spend your points wisely, and so I had played in that game, never game mastered a game, but then supers is a completely different. It's basically I throw heavy power people after heavy power people and let them duke it out, kind of thing.
Yeah,
and it's just different, and so I would have been at a loss because I didn't know the pitfalls of Rifts, and I didn't necessarily know all the pitfalls of running a supers game. So it was important to have some of that background. And so there's another lesson there, right? If I couldn't lean on you, I would have failed probably miserably. But so know your material and try to be careful.
Yeah,
not to go bite too much off. So
yeah, I mean, like I said, I guess the only advice I could give if you're not collaborating, probably if you're in a time crunch, is just don't do that setting. Like you really have to be honest with yourself, I think, and that's maybe one of the earlier steps is, can I do this? Can I do justice to the setting that I want to do? Because it's better to have a simpler setting and do it right than to have a more like ambitious setting and not do it justice, because in the former case, that's just going to be more fun for everybody. It's going to be a better experience for you. It's going to be a better experience for the players. If you just kind of like are more honest with yourself about your, it's just like the classic pitfall of anything, of being overly ambitious, without kind of, having the self-reflection to be like, can I do this? Right. So I definitely think that's kind of a takeaway. Maybe our final takeaway is, if you are starting to work on stuff and you're like, okay, I'm getting stressed out. This is way too ambitious than I thought it would be. It's always better to cut your losses than to try to keep going and like burn out, right?
Right.
So it's always better to kind of like, well, let's go back and simplify this. So in our case, you might have been like, I just can't do hidden magic and cybernetics and superhero. So let's just start with god powers and there's no hidden magic or something. And you just haven't been honest with the players, being like, right. It's just too much for me and it's not going to turn out well. So I think that's one of the steps to do while you're making this. If you're seeming like you can't bring stuff together and you're getting stressed out, then it's probably better to take it back a couple steps, right? I mean, you've had experience, others would make your own settings. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That is a great final takeaway. So we talked about how to take those concepts, how to figure out, the different pieces that you can kind of pull together, how to tweak them, and then again, if you're okay with it, I can absolutely publish that PDF on the website.
Yeah, we'll throw the PDF up. Yeah,
and so some people can kind of dig in your brain and see what we kind of put together for our setting. But again, like you said, great final thought. If it's too much, it's too much. And the beautiful thing about Savage Worlds, as a system, there's plenty of settings. So maybe there's one that's better suited for just picking it off the shelf to do what you want to do. So that was the final thought. So that's got Carl and Eric here with Tabletop Tango. I guess this is the third in a series on creating a new campaign, and it was a lot of fun working with Eric. Always is on. It's cool to have someone to bounce ideas off and, things on mechanics. Yes. I'm not a mechanics guy. It made it easier, just to cut in, it made it easier for me too, even to kind of have because you were doing the story, it made it easier to bounce stuff off of you and be like, okay, well, what do you want? And it kind of gave me some constraints so I could be like, okay, I'll cut this away and focus in. So it definitely, collaborating could be a very big tool. Now, this is kind of had a random idea that maybe we'll record a battle of a game and we can kind of post that maybe just to kind of show what it's like. If the other players are into it, maybe we'll see. That might be a fun thing to do. Yeah. Everyone else is doing actual plays. Why not us? Why not? Boy, that's yet another thing running on my Mac when Foundry is taking up 60% of the CPU. Maybe I'll do it. I'll like to do it. You'll have to record on your side. So yeah. All right, everybody. Hey, Carl and Eric here with Tabletop Tango. Thank you again for watching. If you liked it, subscribe, like. We love doing this. It's a lot of fun. So we will catch you next time. Happy gaming. Stay safe.